At the peak of their cruelty, the Nazi Einsatzgruppen were able to murder over 33,000 Jews over the course of just 2 days. These were the mobile death squads of the Nazi regime, made up of the Waffen-SS, Gestapo officers, and often with the help of local fascist auxiliaries. The Einsatzgruppen were the paramilitary forces sent to the Eastern Front in tandem and with the support from the Wehrmacht. Their job was to rid the area of undesirables, murdering those who were deemed to have no place in the world the Nazis wished to build. This would mean primarily Jews, Romani, and the cultural and political elite of nations deemed inferior. Of the Jews killed during the Holocaust, around 25% were murdered by the Einsatzgruppen. In today's video, we will look at the origins of such a force and the type of crimes committed against so many. The origins of the Einsatzgruppen start with the man who is often credited in steering the Nazis towards their ultimate final solution to the Jewish question, Reinhard Heydrich. Heydrich deserves a video of his own lists of horrors, but for our purposes today, we start by looking to his actions in Austria. Heydrich employed his security forces in occupied territories to carry out tasks vital to the occupation or takeover of countries the Nazis wished to annex. Originally known as the Einsatzkommando, these groups' first actions were in securing government buildings following the Anschluss of Austria. This was where Nazi Germany forcibly annexed Austria through assassination, attempted coup, and threatened invasion. These squads rose to prominence again in the Nazi annexure of the Sudetenland, then part of Czechoslovakia. Their role escalated from not just securing government buildings and documents, but also to arresting and interrogating government officials. The next year, the Einsatzkommando were involved in one of the most heinous crimes committed by the Nazis, the T4 program. The T4 program was the Nazi involuntary euthanasia program. Members of the Einsatzgruppen were involved in the murder of vulnerable men, women, and in particular, children. The reason? For nothing more than being born with conditions such as Down syndrome, epilepsy, and any condition deemed to be incompatible with the Nazi racial purity ideals. Over 275,000 people were murdered, and many, in a precursor of the horrors to come, were killed in so-called gas vans. These mobile killing vehicles were sealed with the exhausts connected to the back of the van. Those locked in would suffocate to death from the exhaust fumes. As you can see, the roles of the Einsatzgruppen escalated from facilitating annexing countries to the murder of disabled children. Their roles would only continue to escalate at the outset of World War II and the invasion of Poland. Heydrich appointed Werner to select and organize the Einsatzgruppen. These men were selected from the most devoted and the most educated Nazis, from the SS, Sicherheitsdienst, Gestapo, and police. They tended to be older, and many had served in the proto-Nazi Free Corps groups that were formed after World War I. As an example as to the level of education these men had, 9 of the 17 Einsatzgruppen leaders held doctorates, and one of them even held a double doctorate. These were to be the ideological soldiers to enact Hitler's key aims, the creation of Lebensraum or living space in Eastern Europe for his growing Reich, and the annihilation of all Untermensch, those peoples who had no place in Hitler's Reich, namely Jews, Romani, and Communists. 7 Einsatzgruppen were established with orders directly from Heydrich to murder all Polish leadership and intelligentsia. Jews and Romani were to be murdered or rounded up into ghettos. The land could then be developed into space for the German population to grow. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss in a bit more detail about the Judenfrage, or the Jewish question. As early as 1933, the Nazis were deciding how to deal with Jews in both Germany and the lands they desired to conquer, from displacing the Jews to Madagascar or to a British protectorate in Palestine. Many ideas were considered and some attempted. Initially, Jews were encouraged to leave Nazi Germany through force and creating a hostile environment, with most of their possessions confiscated. But the bigger question was how to deal with the millions of Jews living in Eastern Europe. We all now know what answer the Nazis settled on. They attempted wholesale destruction of the Jewish race. The path towards Auschwitz was incremental and started with the race laws and pogroms, and one of the more violent steps taken was that of the Einsatzgruppen and their deployment during Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa was the name given to the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, which began in June of 1941. Communism and Bolshevism were seen directly linked to Jews, in part due to some of the high-ranking members of the Soviet Union being culturally Jewish, and in large part due to the anti-Semitic trope that Jews were behind most of the world's ills. The Nazi leadership saw no answer to their Jewish problem as long as the Soviet Union existed. The vast majority of European Jews lived in the Soviet Union, mainly in the areas the Nazis sought to claim their living space. There would be no room for those peoples living currently in the desired land. Himmler made it very clear to his SS commanders that the plan would be to reduce the population of the Soviet Union by around 30 million, either by bullet or starvation. As the German army plunged into Eastern Europe, their progress was quick and they took much ground. This gave the Einsatzgruppen the opportunity to commit their atrocities. As we said earlier, the Nazis considered Judaism and Bolshevism to be linked, the term Judo-Bolshevism being very commonplace at the time. This can be seen in Heydrich's orders as to which people were to be murdered. Any ranking Communist Party official was to be murdered along with any provocateur or saboteur. He specifically ordered that any Jew, regardless of age, was considered a provocateur. Any Red Army prisoners of war who were Jewish or even just from the areas of high Jewish populations were to be executed. As the Soviet army retreated east, the regions left behind were without any sort of law or order. Pogroms against the Jews by the locals were widely encouraged by the SS death squads, with 40 taking place within weeks of the outset of the Nazi invasion in Ukraine, Latvia, and Lithuania. Auxiliary support from locals in these countries were common, as neighbour turned on neighbour. The Nazis would even release prisoners convicted of violent crimes and encourage them to join in on the genocide. One notable example is of a Lithuanian involved in these pogroms who was known as the death dealer of Kaunas. Working out of a garage, a group of Jews and Soviet officials were gathered up and held captive. He would signal for a prisoner to be brought forward, at which point he would cave their head in with a large iron bar to the cheering and clapping of a large crowd. Between these beatings, he would play a rendition of the Lithuanian national anthem on his accordion, and then beckon the next victim to be brought. He was seen to have killed around 50 people in this manner. The usual process for the Einsatzgruppen was to arrive to a town or village and round up the victims. Identities of those deemed undesirable were obtained from the local government or police forces. Under the guise of deportation, the victims would be forced to march from their homes to nearby ravines or pre-dug graves. The captives were then made to strip or hand over any valuables. In smaller groups, they would be led and made to lie in the pits or on the bodies of those already murdered. Death followed by a bullet to the back of the head. One particularly horrific atrocity committed by the Einsatzgruppen was the liquidation of the Riga ghetto. This was overseen by SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckeln, who was behind the Babi Yar massacre, where 33,000 people were killed over the course of just 2 days. It was the level of efficient killing in this massacre that led Jeckeln to be chosen to liquidate the Riga ghetto. Around 5,000 able-bodied Jews were spared and deemed useful to the war effort. These people were to be worked to death in the factories to fuel the Nazi war machine. The rest were rounded up and told to bring some of their valuables and transported from the ghetto. In groups of around 1,000, they were marched to the killing grounds. Those who could not keep up were executed on the spot. An area of forest had been prepared by Soviet prisoners of war with multiple mass graves dug. When they arrived, the prisoners were split up and stripped, and their valuables were confiscated and sorted. The Jews were then made to lie in the pits among the bodies of those murdered earlier that day. They were then shot in the back of their head with a single bullet from a Russian submachine gun. Those that managed to survive were buried under the mass of corpses. This process became known as Sardine Packing due to the way so many people were stuffed into the mass graves. 23,000 Jews were murdered in this way on the first day, and 10,000 on the second. Only 2 people survived this massacre. Although a large number of Jews and undesirables were murdered in this manner, news soon spread of the massacres. It became far too inefficient for the Nazi regime to continue these methods the further east they went, and another solution to commit mass murder was required. In January of 1942, 17 of the highest-ranking Nazis met, Heydrich conducting what now remains in infamy as the Wannsee Conference. It had already been agreed that the Jews and the other undesirables were to be transported by rail to the east and that the German army would leave the civilian populations to the SS. The question was not whether the Jews were to be killed, but rather how they were to be killed. Heydrich's plan for the 11 million Jews in Europe was to work them until they died. They were to build the infrastructure, such as roads, or work in the factories, and worked until they dropped dead. Those that were deemed to be useless were killed wholesale in a bid to remove all Jews from Europe. This was called the final solution to the Jewish question, what we now know as the Holocaust. From a band of thugs locking up government buildings to murdering children in the snows of Latvia, the members of the Einsatzgruppen and their actions are one of the prime examples of Nazi cruelty. It is an example as to how the crimes of the Nazis built and grew ever more barbaric and extreme. These well-educated men wanted to be part of the process of what they saw as the cleansing of Eastern Europe and the formation of a racially pure empire. In pursuit of their ideals, they committed some of the worst crimes in human history. It is important to never forget about the massacres committed by the Einsatzgruppen. Racial and extremist laws or beliefs that dehumanize people led to the Sardine Packing, with the murder of people treated as an industrial process. The path to the gas chambers was taken in many steps, each one taken with the view that the Jewish race and the undesirable elements of Europe needed to be removed. From the first step of acting on prejudice and bigotry, there were not that many steps needed to reach the industrialized gassing of children. It is a path that has been trodden on too many times in our collective human history. One hopes that it is a path that will not be trodden again, but wherever there is such bigotry, it is always a possibility.